Welcome to the Connectors Podcast, the show that explores the importance of making meaningful connections for personal and professional growth and happiness. We will share how building and recognizing strong connections in life can help you achieve your goals, find fulfillment in your work, and how you can create opportunities to build a purposeful and meaningful future. Welcome to the Connectors. I'm excited to introduce our guest for today, Hannah Brown. Hannah is a learning design strategist with over 25 years of experience working in-house as an external consultant. She believes her clients are the captains of their ships. Hannah's role is to provide them with navigation instruments so they can plan their route and get to their destination successfully. Clients call on Hannah when they need help defining their learning destination, clarifying where they are currently, and mapping their path to achieve their goal. Hannah offers these programs as navigation instruments for learning leaders and executives, for learning managers, and for learning designers. Hannah has also received 2 design awards from the Institute for Performance and Learning. Her recent book, Training That Clicks, Virtual Design Playbook, is for people who design virtual training and don't have a learning and development background, and for people who are looking for ways to elevate their virtual courses so they're more engaging and have more impact. Please join me in welcoming Hannah Brown to our show today. Hello, and welcome to the Connectors. How are you doing today, Quentin?
Hey, Joe. Hey, Hannah. I'm good. How are you? Hannah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. I'm excited for our conversation.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. We know that you've been busy doing all sorts of different projects.
It has been
welcome, Hannah.
Yeah, it has been a busy summer, and I'm excited to share a little bit more with you and with your audience.
You can find us on the following social media platforms: Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube.
So, shall we go into wins and fails? I don't know, Hannah, if you've had the chance to listen to our podcast, but we like to ask everyone something that went well this week and something that we could learn from.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, do you have anything in mind?
Yeah, so they're both kind of not work related, but I figure that's okay because I'm a whole person. It's not just always about work, but I feel like a win is it's summer here right now. It's nice and hot, and I've rediscovered my love of swimming. So I've gone to the pool consistently for the last couple of weeks, which feels great. So I'm treating that as a win. And my fail is a colleague of mine, somebody who does some work for me. His wife has brain cancer, and she's terminal. She's in her last weeks or months of living. And I sent him a text last night just saying, you popped into my head, just checking in to see how you're doing and hoping you're managing okay. And he sent me a big, long text reply. I don't know him really, really well. And I was left with, I don't even know how to respond. Like, it's not something that I can relate to. And he was just pouring his heart out. And I responded with a shorter text reply and thought, oh gosh, was I being appropriate in my response, or was I being sensitive enough or empathetic enough or not? So I went to bed and I thought, oh, I couldn't sleep. So I went back and kind of gave a more thoughtful response. So he hasn't replied. So I don't know, but that to me feels like a bit of a fail where I maybe didn't show up in the best version of myself, maybe.
Oh, I can empathize, Hannah. I find I'm not very good with things such as, terminal illnesses and death and having those conversations with people. So I can completely understand. I never feel like I have the right words. Yeah. So I'm sure he understands. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, totally. How about you, Joe? How about your week?
Oh gosh, I hadn't fully thought of anything yet. I'd say a win was I attended a policy talks workshop for the City of London. So it was great because it talked a lot about the strategic priorities for all of the initiatives that are happening in terms of like housing, homelessness, health and wellness, infrastructure, all those things. So it was very interesting because some of those are some of the elements of my community that I would like to start bringing forward to in the podcast as well and talking about some of these important issues. So I think that was a win just because I haven't spent a lot of time, even though I've been in the city a long time. I think because I have the space a little bit more now, I'm not such in mom mode all the time as my son's getting older. I'm wanting to fill up my sort of breadth of knowledge in different ways. And so that was something new and different for me. Yeah.
Very cool.
Oh,
juicies, hey?
I feel like fails happen every day more in terms of learning about myself. So I'm always tweaking something, figuring out, okay, that's not working. When I feel lazy or I'm not doing the things I think I maybe should be doing, I can reframe it another way. So I don't have anything specific, but it's always just every day is a learning experience for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
How about you, Quentin? What you got today?
Wow. I was chatting with my business coach this week, and because I'm trying to convert a volunteer position into something that's paid and sustainable long term. And she said to me, I've never heard of anyone who's actually been proposed and offered work having left a volunteer position. So you're obviously very valued and you obviously do a great job. And I felt amazing because that's coming from my coach, so this is a lady who's, that's a really good win. It really empowered me. I think the fail would be, I was supposed to have a book club event on Tuesday night with the International Society for Performance Improvement because I'm the president of the Montreal chapter, blah, 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 blah. People assured me that they'd be there and they didn't. And I was left all on my own holding an empty microphone.
No, you should have called me. I would have come. I would have virtually shown up.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's life.
It's hard to get book clubs going.
Frustrating.
Book clubs are a toughie. I mean,
people say they want to do it and they don't.
Yeah, it's fine. I don't feel personal sense of loss over that. People are busy, But yeah.
That's what people like to say anyway. Busy. It's the most honestly, I twinge when I hear the word busy. Yeah, it's a trigger word for me.
So busy.
I'm so busy.
Well, and I think we have a culture of busy is good and so busy is even better. And I don't know. I've intentionally actually, I think I shared this with you earlier on one of our kind of pre-calls that I've decided this summer that I'm working less. And so I'm making time for things like swimming and things like that. So I'm trying to be more strategic with my time and less busy, and creating space for other things. So I don't know. I think there's a cultural thing there that busy and over busy is a good thing. So we fall back on that, and it's a generally accepted excuse, I suppose.
As an immigrant, it's definitely a North American construct.
Yes, I believe
We're
that.
like, what the hell? What do you mean you work
busy
your ass
word?
off and you just at 60? Come on, there's a whole life to live.
I think once you've put in at least 20 years of work and beyond, you've earned some efficiencies, I think, as well as some time to yourself. And, you put in a lot of that work and that effort up front, sort of front loading, I guess, your life. And I think once you get to a certain point, you get smarter about finding ways to be efficient with your time or I guess your schedule management or activity management. Time management isn't really a thing, but how you schedule your life and how you show up and how you perform. And I find certain things get easier. It just depends what it is, but always good to be challenging yourself. That's for sure. Yeah. And you were just on vacation, were you not? Somewhere pretty fabulous.
I was in Portugal, and we managed to fit our week in between the heat wave that happened just before and the raging forest fires that are happening right now. So we had a lovely time. We had lovely weather, and I would certainly go back.
Amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
Where did you go in Portugal?
We spent about 4 days in Lisbon, and then we went south to the Algarve for about another 4 days. And we went with 3 other couples. So there were 8 adults traveling, which is a big group to try and coordinate for dinners and transportation and logistics and all of that. But it worked really, really well. So it was fun.
That's fun.
Oh, that's nice. So who organized everything? Did you do all that organizing, or usually
No,
there's like one person in the group?
Yeah, you know what? I'm usually a big organizer, but with travel, my husband, he travels a lot with work, so he is very savvy at it. So he did a lot of it, but also didn't want it to feel like it was a Dave trip. So intentionally stepped back, and then some of the other people stepped in and did parts as well. So yeah, it ended up being a collaborative planning, which was nice.
Nice.
Very cool.
It's great when that works out. I love Portugal. I'd love to go back. It's been a long time, but I loved Lisbon and the Algarve as well. So I'm excited you're here today, Hannah. Just to give a little background, Hannah and I actually met years ago. I want to say maybe 15 years ago, 12, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was through courses we were both taking, I think, outside of work, and we'd end up being in sort of the L&D environment, so learning and development. And we just met, and we'd always tend to show up at these same programs again and workshops. So we've had that relationship in terms of our, I guess, love of learning and exploring new ways of working and things like that. So
absolutely. Yeah, it has been a long time.
Interestingly, I knew about you, Hannah, before Joe suggested you to come on the show, because I had been looking for a copy of your book, Training That Clicks, as I moved into L&D. So yes, you've been on my radar. And I've got a copy of your book. It's going to be some of my summer reading. Thank you very much.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I always love it when people read my book. There's big margins, and I love it when people mark up the pages and scribble it and make notes and stickies and dog ears and stuff. So if that's what you end up doing with my book, then I will consider it a success.
That's what I'll end up doing. So
very good.
That's a sign of a well-used book, hey? And a book with a lot of ideas. Yeah.
I know I used to fear, messing up my books, because I thought maybe at some point I'd give it away or I'd share it, and I didn't want people to see what I had marked up. But now I just go for it. Yeah.
So as an aside, if I can interject, so I do a fair bit of reading, and I like my work focused books to be hard copies because I like to edit them up. But it also gets really expensive. So if I can, I buy used on Amazon, and sometimes I get a book that has the previous person's highlighting in it and marks and stuff, which I feel like is a little insight and a little bit of connection, dare I say, with the previous reader. So I feel free then to mark up my own, even if they might get passed on to somebody else. So I project that a little bit, maybe.
Love that.
It's like paying it forward with your extra layer of ideas on top.
Right.
Connection.
Yeah. So Hannah, you've had a long, extensive career in learning and development. I'd like to know a little bit about, I guess, how your role in that arena has developed and evolved over the years, and where it has brought you to now. It sounds like you're working on some really interesting things. And when we had our conversation previously, you are also really working on this connection and engagement component with people on the human side of things in L&D. So you talk a little bit about how your career has evolved over the years and where it is now.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been in learning and development for 25 years, which makes me feel a little bit old, but there you go. That's the truth of it. And because I started so long ago, everything was in person. So my roots are in instructional design, and over the years, or decades even, I suppose, it's evolved into virtual learning and e-learning, in addition to lots of other things. Most of my time has been working as an external consultant. I did work in-house for a life insurance company. I headed up their sales training department from North America. But a lot of my history has been designing kind of bespoke or custom training programs for companies. And I would say in the last probably 5 years, I've switched away from kind of the consultant mode where I'm, roll up my sleeves and I'm doing the design, and realizing that I can have greater reach by teaching other people what I've learned over those 25 years. So I've moved from, maybe it's that parable of, instead of, doing the fishing for somebody, teaching them to fish. So really looking at, well, what are my areas of expertise and where are the places where I can really add value to help other people design really impactful training programs. My company name is Performance Matters. So for me, my bias is always, it's not just enough for people to come on in a training program and feel engaged. And yes, absolutely connect with others, connect with the content. But they also need to be able to learn that and apply that afterwards. So it needs to lead to a behavior change or a performance change. So that's really my benchmark. Yes, connect and apply and change behavior. So that's what I'm trying to help people do with their training, design, and delivery.
Amazing. What are some ways that you're shifting yourself into this other strategy mindset or into this more systems mindset?
Yeah, well, my book is a great example. So instead of me going and designing virtual training programs for people, putting my thinking into a book that I can then share with others, there's a program that supports that as well. It's called Design for a Digital Age. So if somebody reads the book and thinks, "Ooh, I want a little bit more," they can sign up for the program and get some more hands-on and activities and practice and face-to-face time with me, I suppose. The other shift to Quentin, to build on your question, is moving from designing individual courses. They can be very impactful and influence performance, but also looking at what's the broader impact that learning can have across an organization. So not just looking at individual courses, but looking at what's the manager's role, who's leading the learning function, and how can they help? I think of them often as a translator. So how can they translate what the company or the organization is doing and the strategy that they have in the direction, and translate that business language to their learning and development team so they can prioritize which are the projects we're going to work on and how can we make sure that it's really going to resonate. So looking at the manager, and then even looking at executives, what's their vision for learning in the organization beyond just the siloed training and development department, but how do you embed learning into the DNA almost of the organization so it becomes part of that culture?
We saw so much that there was this need over the pandemic for the culture to be shared in different ways, in hybrid and remote, and we saw how this really affected employees positively or negatively. So yeah, culture is a huge one, and it comes from the leadership. The leadership needs to mentor that. They need to show us how to do it often. Hey.
Yeah, absolutely. And in working with clients, it was, managers and leaders, everybody struggled in the pandemic, but I think so much landed on the leaders and the managers' shoulders that they ended up becoming the face of the organization because everybody's just meeting in Zoom and meetings and that kind of thing. And so then it was up to them as the face of the organization to then also communicate that culture. And I think, like any, population, there's some leaders that did that really well, and there's some leaders who really struggle just because of who they were, and then layering on that virtual element, which can be really disengaging, I think, even at the best of times.
This reminds me of the conversation we had with Phil Burgess yesterday, actually, because he's in the UK and started a company called Within. And he was a chief people officer in corporate, and that was part of his role, was changing these behaviors and performance within the management to help support, that trickle down effective training and all those things. So I'm just hearing that theme again, and I think it's really important work because it sounds like there's this real focus on, it's not just the training, but it's how can we get people in the culture to really care about the behaviors and the changing of behaviors as we're implementing this training. And just to piggyback on what Quentin was saying about, after the pandemic, what would be one skill that learning and development professionals need to ensure that training programs connect with the employees and the organization's strategic direction?
I think there's can I say two things? I have two things that come to mind. One is when I think of learning and professionals and the design and the facilitation process. And then the other was because of the last bit of your question. It was around, connecting to the business goals. So if I can separate it and talk about those two.
Yeah.
So for the first part, I think when we do training, and I'm talking specifically in a virtual Zoom, Google Meet, Teams type context, I think we need to create space for people to connect with each other and to connect early on. So often still, I think that people will end up being a bit of a talking head, and that somebody sitting in a webinar or a training session end up being kind of passive consumers. And when they don't have that opportunity to connect and engage with the facilitator and with each other, I think it just kind of shuts them down and lowers the energy. So I think when designing and when facilitating virtual training, we really need to hold that space for people to have conversation and dialogue, which then also, going back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of applying it and changing performance, you need to be able to talk about it and interpret it and personalize it so that you can then figure out, how am I going to apply this afterwards? So I think that connection early on, like even in the first 5 minutes, a breakout room or something like that is really important.
Like creating that safe space that people feel open. Yeah,
for sure. And it's hard to be vulnerable virtually, or so people just want to have their cameras off and that type of thing. So it certainly is. It's something we have to work very intentionally at, I think.
Sorry, go for it.
Well, I was going to go into the second part of the question, but if you had a comment, then go ahead, Quentin.
I was thinking, like based on the research that I've done on learner engagement on screens, if it's just a passive taking in of information, like a learning video, a talking head video, the engagement drops from like 95% at 1 minute to about 40% at 2 minutes. So you've really got to catch people within 2 minutes and get them working and doing stuff, and involved in the chats, involved in a breakout room, talking, sharing in some way. So yeah, totally.
Well, and if I can just build on that a little bit, let's say your training session starts at 10 a.m., logging in early, opening up the call prior to that, and talking to people. I mean, lots of people log in right at the time of, or even a little bit after, but some people log in beforehand. And so having some kind of an activity or conversation so that as people are coming in, they can join in the conversation. And already it changes the feel and the dynamic that, oh, this is a place where my opinion will be heard, where my opinion will be sought, where I can have a voice, and where I'm invited to contribute. And that sets a really different tone than logging in and everybody has their screen off and finishing a little bit of lunch, and the moderator saying, okay, we'll start in 5 minutes, because it sets a really different tone. And I think it's important to pay attention to that.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's so true. And I typically don't like when people rush into a meeting or jump into a workshop program, even a meeting, and without actually saying a hello or introducing people or having some kind of icebreaker. I find it's too abrupt. You need that sort of segue into it. Yeah.
Yeah. They need to come in and put their laptop on the table and get the bottle of water and check the lights are okay, and then set the scene and then open the session, virtually.
It's a lot on a facilitator. There's many components, a lot of things to think about for sure. Yeah. And sorry, to circle back, Hannah, on the second part of that question.
Yeah. So if I remember, and if your listeners remember, the second part had to do with, I think, making sure that the learning that we're designing and facilitating or putting out into the world is tied to kind of the organization's objectives. I think that was it.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect. So I think for me, I think I've realized in the last few years that business acumen is a key part of being successful in organizations. And if we think within the learning function, being able to if we grow up in learning and development, as I did, we know all about learning objectives and performance objectives and outcomes and things like that. But we don't necessarily learn about the business and even what the different functional areas are, or what are the metrics that they care about, or how does operations work with marketing, with sales and finance. And oh my goodness, if I even have to look at an income statement, my eyes might glaze over, right? But I think those are core skills that learning professionals need to be able to understand how the business operates, so they know how their learning can actually impact the business. So that's my latest area of passion, is looking at business acumen within learning and development. And I think it scales depending on where you are in the organization. So if you're an individual contributor, a designer, you're facilitating, I think your scope of what you need to understand is maybe focused on, the different business unit that you're supporting or the functional area. If you're in management, then, you need to have a bit broader understanding of business acumen and be more comfortable with finance and kind of accounting terms. And obviously, if you're an executive, then you need that much more knowledge. So that's the other piece of it. Joe, for your question is yes, design really good training programs and facilitate them really well, but be able to be bilingual, maybe. So speak learning and development language, but also speak the business language.
Mm-hmm. And is that a good way to jump into what we talked about before? So you were talking about the universal business language and how important that is in learning and development. And you're possibly writing a book about this?
I am. I'm working on my second book. The specific focus is shifting a little bit in my mind, but my first book looked at the individual contributors, so designers, facilitators, instructional designers, things like that. So this book will shift. It'll look at managers and leaders in an organization, and will really focus on, in those roles, what does it mean to have a greater impact for the learning and development department. So looking more holistically across the organization, and of course, business acumen being a key skill that managers and leaders need to have in order to do that successfly. So yes, it is a passion of mine, and my passion is going to be put to paper starting this fall. So I'm not sure when the book is going to come out, but I'm going to start writing it anyways in the fall, which is exciting.
Wow, book number 2. That's very exciting. Woo!
Very exciting. Yes. Congratulations.
Thank you. I figured for writing the first one, I had to get my thinking on paper, but I also had to learn the whole book writing process. Whereas this time I figure, okay, I know the book writing process. Now it's just about getting my thoughts on paper. So I'm hoping it'll be a little bit smoother. So
I've always been curious about that process, and Quentin, I might pick your brain on a different day about that.
Yeah.
I've decided I'm going to be writing a book.
Good for you, Quentin. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Very good.
I'm terrified, but
you just said it out loud.
Well, that's the first step, is saying it out loud, and then people know. The other thing, and I don't know how many of your listeners follow me on LinkedIn. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, and when I started writing my first book, I decided to talk about that process. And so every Friday from February till November, well, I'm still posting about it, but every Friday I would do a Friday book update post on LinkedIn. And it was, the success is sure, but also the failures, like, oh my God, I have to edit it again or whatever. So if you put it out there now on this podcast, Quentin, and if you start posting about it on social media, then you're more on the hook, and that's your built-in accountability. And to go back to the podcast title, it's a way to connect. And I felt like when my book finally came out, there were enough people, or so many people, who were following me on LinkedIn. They knew my book was coming out, and it created a real connection point. So that was pretty exciting too.
Yeah, and people love to follow that journey with you, I find. And you're also learning along the way and sharing that experience. And we've been doing that with the podcast. It's like, as we go, we tell people we're not experts. We're learning about this as we do it, and sharing that experience. And I think that just opens up a whole other world, because people are like, oh, great. They're not perfectionists about this, but they want it to be good, and they want feedback. And I like that.
I think too, that if people can see the unvarnished, or maybe the vulnerable side of what we're doing, then it makes it feel more achievable for somebody else who's considering it. So if somebody can see your journey about hosting this podcast and can connect with you as somebody who's figuring it out, then they also then can say, oh, I can see myself in them. I could see myself doing this, and it feels more accessible then somehow.
That's exactly it. And I think that's a message we want to share, right? Is I want to see other people succeeding, and I want them to know that they can do this. They can try something. It doesn't need to be perfect. So yeah, it's a really good point.
Success is not in a constant upward motion, step by step, where every step is equal to the one before. Like, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, a jump forward, a jump back. It's the way it goes. We're humans, we're messy, and so our projects are messy as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I wanted to ask in terms of this, more obviously you do a lot of virtual training. I'm not sure, do you still do in-person training as well? Or
I have been, but clients have been asking me to come back in person. So I've been doing virtual or in-person facilitation as well. Yeah.
Okay. And I guess through both of those avenues, obviously there's sort of, good and bad to both, or positive and some negative to both. I guess I'm just wondering, like, how do you address the different types of learning that people have? So some people are neurodivergent, some people learn by doing, some people learn by reading, watching, that kind of thing. So how do you address that when you're training? Just because, as we know these days, everybody is a little bit more transparent about their learning abilities.
Yeah. So first of all, I really appreciate that you didn't use the word learning styles, because it's such a myth. And I'm like, oh no, she's going to say it and you didn't.
Yeah,
so I'm
me
so
too.
glad.
Let's leave that one by the wayside.
Yeah. So having now called that out, I think really good design just naturally accommodates different learning approaches and different needs, I suppose. I need to think about how I can say this respectfully. So a close family member developed some mental health issues over the pandemic, and in supporting her anxiety and in supporting her, I feel like personally, I learned so much about different people's needs. And so it's not neurodiversity, Joe, that you mentioned, but it's something, to be considered. And in looking at her and what her struggles have been, it made me so much more aware of people and how they show up in a training environment. Mostly I was thinking of it in the context of virtual, but certainly also applies to in-person as well. And just, I think the greatest thing, if I had to distill it down to one thing, is, and you mentioned it earlier, is creating that psychological safety. So as a facilitator, whether it's virtually or in person, creating a space or radiating approachability, maybe, so that if somebody does have mental health issues, is socially anxious and doesn't want to turn the camera on, that's the reason why, or in person doesn't want to be called out to answer a question, or if it's whatever the issue is, that if I'm approachable as a facilitator and they feel safe sharing that with me, I think that would be a big step in that direction. And then I think with that is also role modeling and respecting differences as they come up. And maybe it isn't, respecting, people aren't going to declare I have ADHD, but if there are smaller examples of differences, and if you can role model respecting that and welcoming all that diversity, however that shows up, I think that also sets the stage for respecting kind of bigger variations in how people show up, if that's an okay way of putting it.
No, I think that was very eloquent.
Yeah, me too. That made perfect sense. If I can just say it back to you in the way that I understood it.
Sure.
By demonstrating an openness in one slight, small way that may even be unnoticed by a lot of people in that room. Someone who's observant and may need to have that safe space or psychological safety is going to pick up on that, and even if it doesn't directly relate to them, they're going to know that they can approach you.
Yeah. Great summary, Quentin. Thank you.
I think it's great. I love that idea, and I can definitely think of instances where I've been the minority in the room, and wherever that was and whatever that situation was, where I was like, nope, I'm not going to speak up here. And then, the Muslim lady in the hijab got the mic, and then I was like, okay, I can do that. If she can get up, I could do that.
For sure. And it can happen so quickly, right? That you shut down. And again, we were talking earlier about getting people to engage in the first, I said 5 minutes, but Quentin, based on your study, I think it maybe should be 2 minutes, but really quickly, I think that's important for connection and engagement, but it's also important to set that tone around this is a safe space to learn and interact. That also needs to happen in those first few minutes.
Mm.
And I'm trying to think back even in training I've taken in the past, and I don't remember a lot of situations in which there was a facilitator that gave me that real comfort. I was in a training session at work not too long ago, and I think that was one of the first sessions I recall that I did feel that way. It did feel like a safe space. We were also amongst our team, and I think some people still were a little nervous to really share truthfully about certain things. So that is a gift. And I think that if the more that we're able to do that and show people that it's okay to, maybe approach this a little bit differently than everybody else is in the class, that will allow for better learning and better absorbing of the information, and that willingness to open up and also share with others. So I think that's extremely important. And I hope that more facilitators are creating those safe spaces in however they are facilitating.
I think if I could build on that and also admit maybe that, I don't think I'm perfect at it. So the build is, as a facilitator, to also be really open to receiving feedback. And so if there are places where I have misstepped, I may or may not know that. I might kind of pick it up instinctually and reflect and think, I could have done that differently. But there will be times when I don't know that. And so I know it's putting back on the person who has the mental health or that is neurodiverse or whatever, and that's maybe a bit unfair. But as much as possible, when we receive that feedback, to be open to that feedback and accept it for the gift that it is. I think that's the other piece of it.
Mm-hmm. That makes me tie up what we've been talking about in the last couple of minutes, because learning is not always a comfortable process.
No.
So in you taking feedback and being open to the feedback, that's already one uncomfortable process if it's constructive criticism or just criticism, So then how do you encourage, okay, so let's imagine that you've got this safe space and people can share psychologically safely. How will you encourage the learning aspects if there's some disengagement or something like that, if there's a friction to the learning process?
I think it starts with really good design, again, and not being just a talking head, but to build in a diversity of learning approaches into what you're doing to make sure that it's less about the person facilitating talking and more about drawing out the knowledge in the room and giving them the participants an opportunity to talk. So I think part of it is in the design, that can hopefully reduce the instances of that learning friction maybe. And then I think the other part is around facilitation, and just to be fluid, I suppose, is the word that comes to mind. And my book, Training That Clicks, is all about design, but the program I mentioned earlier, Design for a Digital Age, is virtual design and virtual facilitation. And in the facilitation course of that program, I talk about, and I know your listeners can't see me, but with my hands, I'm doing an infinity symbol. And that infinity symbol represents knowing your content really well. And I know oftentimes in a training context, we get really focused on, I have all these learning objectives and I got to get through this content. And so you can get really content focused. And yes, that's important, but you need to balance. On the other side of the infinity symbol is the context, and being aware of creating that context for learning to happen. And sometimes to support the context, you let the discussion go on longer than maybe the 10 minutes that you thought it would, which means then that you need to know your content well enough that you can adjust on the fly so people can still get the learning that they need, but you're not so focused on the content at the expense of the context, and vice versa. You're not so focused on the context that you don't cover, you're not just telling war stories and that kind of thing and building camaraderie, that you're actually covering the learning content. So to summarize, Quinton, I think that, reducing learning friction, there might always be some, but I think our opportunities to lessen that are in really good, engaging and diverse learning design, creative learning design, and then flexibility when we're facilitating so that we can accommodate the needs of the people in the room.
Oh my God, I love that. Especially your two pillars of content and context. That's so spot on the mark. Oh my God, that definitely shows your experience in working in this field. It's so true.
I was just going to say that's the sign of a great facilitator and
yes.
instructional designer, because I love what you said about drawing out the knowledge in the room. Because I find when I go to workshops or training sessions that my favorite part is the discussions that happen amongst the people that are there, because you have a group of people that are from all different backgrounds and experiences, and then you start talking and sharing. And I think the facilitator can allow for that, and it creates this great environment. And but to be able to also stay on task and on the content and the context is is a wonderful dance, I guess, that you do with the people in the classroom. Mm.
Yeah, if I can. And in addition to listening to your podcast, I also listen to a podcast called Coaching for Leaders. And I don't remember who the person was who shared this, but it was episode 464, and it's a sticky on my wall, and it says, you don't get to look good and grow at the same time. And I have that as a sticky because I thought, perfect. So Quentin, you were saying, sometimes learning is hard, and absolutely it is. You can't get to learn and grow and look good at the same time because it's messy. So I like that quote, and I like to keep that at the forefront of my mind.
Awesome. Love that quote.
Yeah, Coaching for Leaders. That was the podcast.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Dave Stachowiak. Yeah.
Did you hear that, Joe? 464 episodes. Good Lord.
I know. We're on this is episode 14. 14.
Good for you.
Good for you.
You'll get there. I'll come back when you're at episode 400. How's that?
Yeah.
Before then too, if you want me, but I know you'll get there, which is great.
Actually, this is 16. Sorry, apologies. This is 16.
Look
Look at us go. So how do you think the future of L&D and virtual training is going to look? We talked a lot about how you're trying to get engagement and connection and create a little bit of a different environment when it comes to learning and development. So I'm just wondering how we can support people through a lot of these changes when they feel disengaged, and how can we bring them back to that engagement when it comes to something that you're passionate about teaching these people, whoever your learners are. How can we make people feel more engaged?
Yeah. So I have a monthly newsletter that I send out, and I've started also, which is kind of a long form. And then I've also started mid-month sending out a blog, which has 3 little snippets. So my blog that I just sent out, I found 2 studies, which I think are relevant. And I'm just going to share them, and then I'm going to use them to answer your question, Joe. So both are from 2022 articles. The first one, SHRM, found that 82% of employees feel lonely, even if they work in the office, and that, of course, it affects their well-being and productivity and things like that. The other study, which is out by Wiley, it's actually like an empirical research article published in HR Manager, also did lots of learning or discovery around kind of connection and engagement. And in their conclusions, what they were recommending is that organizations need to create engaging virtual spaces for personal connection. And I took that and wanted to expand on that and say, yes, virtual spaces for meeting, but also we need to pay attention to that personal connection in our virtual training when we are doing virtual training and we aren't bringing people together. So I thought those 2 studies and data points were really, just really telling. So Joe, can you go back now that I got all excited about my what's the other part of the question that I should be answering?
Well, how can people feel more engaged? And I guess
right.
you just say something that made me think of something you said before. When you said someone might have their camera off, potentially in it. So what do you do with someone that does that? Or how do you get that person engaged when it feels almost like a wall for you to engage them when they don't even want to show their face?
Yeah. There's a funny dynamic I've observed, and I don't know the answer to it. So I've observed that when we meet in person at a meeting, boardroom or whatever, that people will bring their lunch and they'll eat, and that's fine. And people aren't comfortable eating virtually. And it seems a bit contradictory to, or the opposite of what I would expect, because we can't smell the, tuna or whatever that you're eating. We can't hear you crunching, maybe if you're, and yet we aren't doing it. So I think people will have their cameras off, especially if it's over a lunch hour or if they're eating. So I think that's part of it. I don't know. I was thinking lately that maybe I should have a training session or something start where everybody brings an apple at the beginning, and we start off, everybody's eating and we see it and get it out of the way. And we just deal with it. So I think the first step, maybe if I can be a bit more serious in my response, is to recognize that there's different reasons why people might have their cameras turned off. So maybe again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, maybe there's an anxiety or there's a mental health issue, or maybe they're having their lunch, or, they're still in their pajamas and their kids are at home. So again, I think creating the space where people are as comfortable as possible. I think setting the expectation too, not just at the beginning of the session, but even coming into it, that this is a session where you are going to be expected to participate. We're going to be expecting you to come off mute and contribute. There's going to be breakouts. We encourage you to come off camera. I've chatted with other trainers, and some of them say our policy is you have to have your camera off or on rather. And if you aren't, then you can't be in the program. I feel like that's a little bit harsh myself, but I think there's a continuum. And then, then there's the culture piece around what's kind of the organizational culture or that team's culture. So I don't know if that's a really clear answer, but a couple of ideas in response anyways.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And I guess I'm just curious, Quentin, for you, because you're also in the L&D environment. Are you noticing some of these same things, we've been discussing today? Like, how have you been approaching some of your training and development?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I've been pretty fortunate that the last couple of bits of training and development have happened face to face, or they've been train the trainer and then the trainer has gone and trained the team. So it's been a lot easier for me to pass along the message and for us to work together and create the program and make sure that it fits the need. I don't know. I definitely have the same thing about eating online. It's so odd. As Hannah was saying it, I was thinking that's me every time. Like, I just finished a program and it was every Wednesday at lunchtime for 4 weeks. And for 20 minutes, I'd be off camera whilst I threw a sandwich or a salad together and then ate it. And I just didn't want to do that online. I don't know why.
Well, there's a great study, and I can't remember now. It's in my book. If I flick and talk, maybe I'll find it. But there's a great study that was done maybe a year or so ago about Zoom fatigue. It's not just Zoom, but it's online fatigue, and kind of the research behind. Oh, I just found it. Jeremy N. Bailenson, and he talks about. There's a couple of reasons for online fatigue, and one is that if we have our cameras on, it's a mirror, but it's also for the person receiving it, that for us to look at each other's faces, front view, and with the face being so big in the camera, that typically is a position that we have with people who we're very close with. So if you think of a partner or child or something, a grandparent, something like that, like if we were in person, we wouldn't be at each other face to face, and we're so close that our faces are like, we'd have some more physical distance. And so I wonder if that eating thing is, we're seeing each other face to face eating. Whereas in reality, if we were sitting in a boardroom, the person might be eating beside me, and I can hear them and I can smell their food, but I'm not staring at them, right after eating, right? So like true. It's in my periphery. And so I don't know if there's part of that to it, but just a hypothesis, I suppose.
That does make sense to me, because even if they're across the table from you, there's a table in between. But
and their faces are smaller because there's distance, right?
I wonder how that's going to evolve. Yeah, I'm curious about, are we going to start going way back in our room, like not being right in front of our camera, but way back there to have the conversation, or
just avatars. My avatar will be attending this meeting.
Oh, did I share that with you? And that somebody at work had an avatar on. It was a large meeting with about 50 people. And this person had an avatar as their face on, like like a live version where it does that sort of filter over top of you. And that's how they showed up in the meeting. And I was like, I don't like that.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that would be a little bit disconcerting, I think.
It's a little uncanny valley for me, but yeah.
And it just feels like another way we're dehumanizing ourselves, right? We're not showing up as who we are. It's this whole digital world. It's kind of scary. So Hannah, we want to ask you, because we ask everybody on the show, but what does connection mean to you?
I mean, certainly lots of things that we've talked about so far today. I think that for me, connection is really about being able to relate to somebody, another person on a human level. And if I go back to my example of my fail from the week and my colleague who I was questioning, maybe I was fine, but I was questioning if I responded appropriately. And I think what I was looking for in myself there was to feel like I was offering connection to him and support to him and coming from a place of empathy. So I think that's the connection definition for me, or the standard that I try and live by, I suppose.
And it sounds like you're implementing a lot of that already into the work that you're doing right now. So I love hearing that. I love knowing that there's people out there really trying to look at the human in everyone and trying to change or at least influence behaviors in a positive direction that are going to support the greater good and for us to work better together.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hannah, thank you so much for joining us today for this episode. We have shared so many different stories. We've learned so much about you, and we're incredibly excited about your upcoming book.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I've loved our conversation. I can't believe the time went by so quickly. I'm sure we could have continued on and talked about a lot more. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. Yeah, we'd love to have you back. And once your book is launched, we can have another episode and see how things are going.
That sounds perfect.
If you've got a story inside of you, consider pitching it to us, the Connectors. Get in touch with us on any of our social media platforms, and either Joe or myself, Quinton, will get back to you. So come join us on the show and let's connect.